Welcome to The Human Experience, a podcast about the stories we live out every day and the importance of championing the vulnerability and courage of the storyteller. I'm your host, Jennifer Peterkin, and it was through my own lived story of experiencing domestic violence that this podcast was created. By traveling the globe and interviewing each guest in person, I am convinced now more than ever that stories have the power to change the world. You can join our community of storytellers by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, signing up for my newsletter, following me on Instagram, and more. Thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, to listen with intention is an act of resistance.
All right. Well, Kim, thank you so much for, first of all, doing this. But second of all, we're in your fabulous room in the spa that you work at,
Yes.
Twisted Shamrock?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There's such a vibe in here. I love it. It's so beautiful, colorful, but calm. And I think this is the first recording experience I've had like this, to record in a space like this. And I actually really love it. I'm like, I wish I had more of this because this is a vibe for recording.
Yeah, it's the hippie shack.
I love it. That is what you called it, right?
Yes.
The hippie room. I love it. So, well, this is about your story. So I want to hear what that means to you. And when I ask you, what is your story? Where would you start that?
Yeah. And so, well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I'm super excited for the opportunity. So really, my story started as someone who was so wrapped up in their teaching career, and then it went crash and burn. And then that created this feeling of being lost, even though I had so many other things besides the identity of teacher. I had wife and mom and, daughter and friend and sister and all of these things. But for some reason, when that teacher piece left, then I became this lost person. It was just completely defeated and miserable. And it was awful because I wasn't really loving the things outside of that. So I couldn't allow myself to enjoy being a stay-at-home mom because I created this meaning of, you couldn't hack it as a teacher for more than 6 years. So you're a failure. And because then I wasn't loving being a stay-at-home mom because the walls felt like they were closing in, then that counted as a failure too. Oh, yeah. And then, feeling sort of resentful to my husband who had this career, I always call it his made it moment. And then I didn't have my make it moment. Yeah. So then I felt resentful about that. And so I kind of suffered on my own from when I left at the end of the school year, ugly face crying until November of that year. So this was back in 2014.
Okay.
So a while ago. And I was having some really unhealthy thoughts about some ideations, or, I was like, oh, I can't have that be the legacy that I leave for my kids because I know that's terribly scarring and I don't think I would have the guts to do it anyway. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just run away then. I'll just disappear and that will probably be better because I'm just so miserable and I just can't seem to function. But then I also didn't want that to be the legacy either. So I was like, I'll go talk to someone. And my husband was like, thank God, finally.
You got there. That's what's important.
There it is. And so I naively started going to therapy. And by the way, this is not a therapy bash, but I naively went to therapy thinking that she was going to be like, oh, Kim, you're so silly. It's just a little identity crisis. I guess I was also naive because I thought I was going to teach until I was in my 90s.
Yes.
And they were going to be like, look, you wrinkly old lady, get out before you die in front of the kids or before you break a hip.
Right?
You got to go.
So much, but
time to go. So
we have to give you up.
Right. So there's a lot of naivety in there. Yeah. But I thought it was going to be this easy fix. Okay, you're having an identity crisis. No problem. Here are the 3 easy ways to fix it. And off you go.
Yeah.
And that was so not the journey. So she was really good at dredging up things from the past, childhood trauma that I guess I had known was there. But, you don't really think my parents got divorced. Everybody's parents get divorced. Sure. There was some domestic violence and, tumultuous relationship stuff going on with my mom and my stepdad. And you just kind of think everybody's parents fight, Yeah. And you don't really think a thing of it. So I knew it was there, but I guess I wasn't aware of how much it impacted me growing up. Yeah. And then being in an abusive relationship with my high school boyfriend for 5.5 years and, not talking to my dad in that time and sort of being disowned from my dad's family. So there was all this stuff there that I kind of was like, oh, it's done. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Like I moved on. And so in therapy, she was like, well, do you know you're codependent? No, I do not.
Dang it.
Darn. That's not part of the identity crisis formula here. And so then it was like anxiety. And then she was like, you should take medication. And I could not allow myself to do that because I felt like a failure already. So I felt like if I had to take a pill to get through the day, then that was like the epic fail. Yeah. And to say like, I couldn't allow myself to do it, but if someone else needs to, like, my God, please do so. I just could not allow myself to do that. And then she would gaslight me for not wanting it. Well, don't you want stairs to climb out of the ditch instead of crawling your way out?
Oh.
And I was like, lady, I will claw my way out of that ditch every day if it means that I am not a failure.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, well, do you know you suffer from childhood emotional neglect? And it was like, so she was really good at giving me all of these labels. But the downfall was then because I was like, those labels, they were my thing. It was like, well, I'm miserable because I'm codependent, and I'm miserable because I have anxiety, and I'm miserable because of childhood emotional neglect. So that really wasn't helpful because then my whole life became those labels. And I was like, feverishly like trying to figure out what the solution was to get rid of those labels. So then I became like the codependency expert, and I had all the books on codependency, all the journals on codependency.
Yeah.
And I'm sure and of course, so with that being said, like no one knew that I was suffering on this level because I kept it secret. So like the only one who really knew was my husband. And I'm sure he never wants to hear the word codependency ever again.
It's a little letter word in your household.
Yes, we don't say codependency, no. And so the gift was, so she was trying to give me tools outside of taking the pill, which was like, well, you could carry invisible cooking spray in your pocket. So when the strings of codependency attach, you can just spray yourself in this cooking spray and it will just slide right off. Okay, great. Thanks. Because like, A, I didn't know how to visualize, and B, I had to be aware of when I was being quote unquote codependent.
Sure.
So like that was just not a realistic thing. So I was in this spiral of, well, I'm codependent, but now what? And so the gift, I will say, in that therapy journey was that she taught me, she suggested that I try yoga, and she suggested I try meditation. And so that opened me up to the possibility that there was another way to get through the struggle besides having to take a pill or going to talk to a therapist. Because after 2.5 years, I felt worse than when I had started. Wow. Part of it was because I had gone into it with the wrong expectations. I went into it thinking it was going to be 3 easy steps, and it was an identity crisis.
Right.
I wasn't prepared for, 30 years of trauma to be drudged up. Surprise! Ta-da! So I was not prepared for that. And I think if I had gone into it with a different mindset, it would have been a different experience. So then I went to a Mind, Body, Spirit Fest, and I went with my yoga mat, and I thought I was going to learn about yoga and meditation. And it was not that. I literally was like, oh, I think I need to go put my yoga mat back in the car.
No one else brought their yoga mat?
No one else brought it, just me. And I walked in so proudly to I am here for some yoga and meditation.
Yeah, right? Like, I know what Mind, Body, Spirit is.
Right? Duh. It's just yoga and meditation. So I had no idea.
Yeah.
But there were aura photos and tarot card readers and crystals and Reiki and all of these things, crystal healing beds that I knew nothing about. And that was back in 2016. And it was just mind blown.
Sure.
And that was it. That was the hook, because I had done a Reiki session, and being on that lady's Reiki table for 20 minutes, I bawled my eyes out, but I felt so much lighter in that 20 minutes that I was like, okay, there's something here to this. And so then I became obsessed. I was like, an angel class? Yes, I will learn about angels. Crystals? Yes. Reiki? Yes. If there was a quote unquote woo class, I was down for it. I was like, yes, I'm here to learn, because I was getting relief. But there was still just a little piece missing there too. And it wasn't until I started working with a life coach where I had the real aha moment of why I did the things that I did, why I ended up in that abusive relationship, why I was miserable in my teaching career, why I couldn't, get on board with loving being a stay-at-home mom. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this one weekend seminar, I was like, that was it, that cracked the code. And so I was like, it's the mindset piece, and it's the holistic piece. That was like the secret sauce for me to finally get over the hurdle of feeling like a miserable mess that was just going to be miserable from now until the end of time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, gosh, that's such a heavy feeling. And I do identify with some of that of just like, you're never going to be better from where you are right now. Like it just feels so heavy and so deep.
Yes.
But first of all, I mean, kudos for the journey, right?
Oh, thank you.
A lot of people won't even go because it is very difficult, right? Like there's nothing about a healing journey that's like
sexy.
This is yes,
it's
exactly.
not sexy.
It is not.
It's not the laptop lifestyle.
No.
It's not a 4-hour work week.
No,
it's not 7 figures for being a YouTube star. It is none of that.
Yes, and a lot of times it's lonely, right?
Yes.
Because it's like a lot of people don't understand where you are, even if they've had their own healing journey themselves. I mean, I feel like people that have done healing work can relate better than people that haven't. And they're like, what are you doing?
Yes.
You used to be fun, but now I don't know.
Now you're not. What happened?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think it's so interesting that you started off teaching. What inspired you to become a teacher? What made you want to be a teacher in the first place?
So I always wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So I think it was like, when you're little, you think like how like you romanticize being a teacher. You get summers off and you get like grading papers and having the teacher's manual and like standing up in front of the class. So basically, I guess I like to be bossy. I don't know.
No, please. I used to play teacher, like with my stuffed animals, whatever.
I'm embarrassed to admit that I played school in the basement until I was like 12 years old, torturing my brother and his friends.
Absolutely. Same here.
Okay.
Same here.
Yes. And so,
but I also had a little brother that I tortured.
Right. So, but ironically enough, I was playing school before I had even been to school because I was in in-home daycare until I was 6.
Okay.
And I was like 3 playing school. And my dad was like, I have no idea how she knows what she's doing because she's never been in school. So like, I think there was just an innate something about me that I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. And then you go to college to become a teacher. And what you are not taught in college is the political nonsense that is wreaking havoc on school districts. And the lack of resources and the lack of funds, and that while some administrators have good intentions, they're really not capable or qualified to be an administrator. So like on some level, everybody's just like kind of like, it's like the blind leading the blind. And I was in a low income school, 2 of them. So when I started teaching in New Hampshire and I was in like a suburban school district, and that had its own issues, like, because in New Hampshire districts are run, they're town-based. So like the townspeople go and they vote their referendum. So if the townspeople don't vote your raise, you don't get a raise. So for the 3 years that I taught there, no raise because it wasn't voted in by the people who lived in the town. So that's the downfall of that. But then when I started teaching in Delaware, I taught in one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Delaware. And then also in a charter school who was under like the watch of this state. And that school has since been closed.
Okay.
So it was very taxing mentally, emotionally, physically, and that you just are not prepared for.
No.
And so you burn out.
I feel like it's one of the biggest burnout careers ever, especially in the last 10 years. Yes. I mean, probably longer than that. But I mean, I know people that are teachers. I'm friends with people that are teachers. I could not imagine being a teacher. Yeah. It quite literally sounds like a nightmare. And I do think that there's like just this romanticized view of being an educator from people that are not in that world. That's like, they get summers off and, they get all these holiday breaks and, they get to clock out at whatever, 2 or something. And you're like, but you don't realize all of the free labor they're doing before and after they've clocked in and,
So and
oftentimes they have to subsidize their own income. And
And that was like part of the burnout because I was working at home. So like my husband was taking my 2 young daughters to like the pumpkin patch at Halloween time, and I was home slaving away on lesson plans and report cards and prepping for parent-teacher conferences and learning the new curriculums that were being implemented and, dealing with the overhaul of that and all these things. So yes, while it sounds very glamorous, we don't actually get summers off. We get like maybe 4 weeks of a summer, and then the rest of that time you're in professional development and workshops, and your school year actually starts 2 weeks before the kids start. And our school year doesn't end when theirs ends. It ends like 2 weeks after. And so we don't get to clock out at 2. It's like usually 4:30, and then we're still working when we get home. So that was the thing. And like at that time, my husband, it was like his made it moment, but his work schedule was super chaotic, super stressful. So I would jokingly say that I was a single mom, even though I was married. So I was like parenting 2 young children, basically alone, trying to navigate this super stressful career. And I just couldn't do it all. Yeah. And it was like burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah. I mean, I quite literally just can't even imagine it. And again, like things feel like they have gotten so much worse with the just the vitriol back and forth with the bureaucracy and political sides of it as well. So I feel like it's already such a high tension, high stress workplace, and then add in all of the other noise and nonsense. I mean, to teach children, there's a lot of variables there anyway. And then to add bureaucracy in on top of that is just not something that everybody has to deal with in a job. So.
Right. Yes. And so then it was like leaving that. So like, having like, and we only get like a half an hour for lunch. So it's not like we get these long, you don't get an hour lunch, all of these things. And a lot of times because schools are short staffed, you're actually being called to like cover a lunch duty, like with the kids eating. So you're like eating your lunch and watching kids at the same time. So you're not really getting all of these breaks that people seem to think that you're having.
Yeah.
So then leaving that, then becoming a stay-at-home mom, it was like the same thing all over again.
Yeah.
So then it was like, 2 young kids, and I also had my 2 nieces at the time so it was like my niece was 4, and then my daughter and my niece were like 5 months apart. So it was like having a 4-year-old and a set of twins.
Oh, wow.
And then an infant. So it was a lot. But like my husband couldn't get it because I'm like, dude, you actually like can close your office door when you want people to leave you alone. I was like, I have no door to close. Like I have no door to close. Okay. Yeah. And like, oh, you get to go to the bathroom in peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get to do that. So like I have four human beings and 2 fur beings watching me use the bathroom. Like there was just no break. So it was like, not to sound jargony, but like my nervous system was taxed from being in the classroom. And then I left that thinking it was going to have like a little bit of a lull, but like my nervous system was still tapped with all of the responsibilities of mom life and wife life and like housekeeper life and all of those things. And then add on that, like another taxing to go through therapy and like have all of that brought back up. So it was just like this constant barrage of insanity on me and my nervous system. And I just couldn't catch a break. Yeah. Is what it really boiled down to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that we even need to harp anymore on teachers because it feels so easy to get it, right?
Yes.
Like it feels so easy that burnout is rampant. You're always short-staffed.
Yes.
And I do think, it's not something that you walk into lightly. You are going through school to get your degree. And I think there are a lot of people that have this very, and I wouldn't even call it romantic, just like optimistic view, right?
Yeah.
They want to be change makers.
Yes.
They want to affect children and be a mentor for them, be somebody that helps them learn and grow. And then you get into it and you're like, this is not what I signed up for.
This is not it.
This is horrifying. So I just kudos to you for even going there. Because I have a lot of respect for teachers in general and just a lot of compassion for where they're at, especially right now as well. So, but I think it's interesting too, when you talk about therapy. So I love that you talked about how your therapist gave you the words for things that you didn't necessarily have before, like codependency.
Yes.
And I do think that's so important, right? It's such an important piece of therapy, but there has to be more to it, right?
Yes.
But I do think that there can be a certain validation in being able to name something, right?
Yes.
It's like not just made up in my head that this is happening. I'm not the first person to be going through this, right? So was there some relief for you in that it was like, okay, there's actually a name for this. There's actually a term for what I'm going through?
On some level, no, because I felt like I was the only person who was codependent.
Wow, okay.
Like, so I think it had the opposite effect for me because I was keeping it so secretive. Like I wasn't. So the part of it, so it was like, okay, I was like, I was being codependent and given the label. So like, I didn't want my parents to know that I was in therapy, especially my mom, because I didn't want her to be like, oh my God, I effed up. You know what I mean? Because my mom is very sensitive about like my parents' divorce and all of that anyways. So like I didn't want anybody to know. So then I had this label that I was sort of suffering with in silence. And that happened with the anxiety and then the childhood emotional neglect, because what I was doing was I was looking at other people in my social circle, like the other moms at my daughter's school. And I was like, oh, they're not codependent. They're not anxious. They don't have childhood emotional neglect. I'm the only one. God.
Okay. Yeah.
This is awful. And so I took it to the polar end of the spectrum. But I think that was the case because it was just like, it was almost like Groundhog Day every week when I would go. It was like, well, tell me about that time when, and how did that make you feel? Yeah. And well, tell me about that. And so it was just like the same conversation almost over and over and over.
Yeah.
But then it got to the point where she was fed up with me, rightfully so, because I was fed up with myself. And so then, of course, like, you know, my husband, our upbringings are vastly different. Like my in-laws are still married. They've been married since 1969. So I always said if there was like any house like that had the proverbial like white picket fence, it would be my husband. They're like, he's the youngest of 3 boys, like your typical all-American family, like really no dysfunction and drama. Not that my mother-in-law grew up with dysfunction, but somehow like as an adult, it didn't seem to affect her. So like he had no idea what I was like going through, what I was talking about. He was like, okay, yeah, I don't really know. So that also didn't help the cause.
Yeah.
So then she was like, well, why don't you should bring your husband because, you know, you're complaining about him an awful lot. And I was like, absolutely not.
Okay.
That's not happening, lady. And she was like, well, you're not willing to be vulnerable. You know, he saw you birth your daughters. I was like, yep, he can watch me birth babies any day of the week, but watch me ugly face cry in the therapist's office? Absolutely not. That's not happening. I don't care. No way, no how. So then she threatened to find someone else to help me. She was like, well, I'm a social worker. I'm a problem solver. So maybe I need to find someone else to help you. And I was like, don't you worry about it. I'll find someone myself. Like, I don't need you to find someone. I'll take care of it on my own, lady.
Okay.
And so that went on for such a long time. And I get it. Like, I think the reason she wanted him to come was so that we could like talk it out. But what I recognized, and even with the medication, was that like all of the things that I was experiencing, they were all learned behaviors because my mom grew up with extreme dysfunction and abuse. And then my dad also grew up with dysfunction. So you put 2 dysfunctional people together and it creates dysfunction.
Yes,
It's a bad recipe. And so I learned all of these, like I learned codependency from my parents.
Yeah.
So that was the other reason I couldn't allow myself to take the medication, was because I knew there wasn't anything chemically going on in my brain that would make me feel anxious or whatever. It was learned. I learned to be anxious. I learned to be codependent. And that was because of childhood emotional neglect and my parents' own codependency and all of those things. And so the issues with my husband really weren't about him.
Sure.
They were about me and learning how to manage myself and my expectations and my own reality. And so like him coming to listen to like, no. Not happening. So yeah, so it really, I felt more isolated and alone with the labels because I didn't know of anybody else outside of my own existence, like my own family dynamic, who had those labels. Okay. Now, as a life coach and healer, I see it. I'm like, oh, yep, codependent person right there.
Okay.
Oh,
yep.
child and emotional neglect right there. So like now that I have like the bird's eye view,
Sure.
I can see it better. But in the moment, in the thick of the struggle, no.
Yeah.
Could not. I thought it was just me. Like, hi, it's me. I'm the problem.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're keeping it close to the chest, I certainly understand how that does feel extra isolating, right? Already going on your journey, on your healing journey feels isolating no matter what, even if there are people surrounding you, supporting you, whatever. And not to say that people weren't supporting you, but they just didn't know what you were walking through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was really good at putting the game face on.
Okay. I'm not. I'm not. I'm like, you can tell everything from this face. So that's all
usually you can. But like in that moment, I was like,
you got your poker face.
Yep. I got my poker face. But generally, I have no filter. So if you're doing something, I think I'm like, oh, what is going on right now? Totally no filter.
Fix your face.
Yes. So in that moment, though, face was fixed. There was no way I was going to let anyone know that something was not right.
Yeah.
Not happening.
And so how long did you say you were in therapy for?
Almost 2.5 years.
Okay. So one thing that I do love talking about, even though I'm not familiar with like all of it, is the fact that there are different modalities to therapy than talk therapy, right?
Yes.
Because I think it's a very natural progression to say like, I'm not okay. What can I do for myself?
Yes.
Therapy. First of all, not all therapists are created equal.
Correct.
Let's just say that. So, disclaimer, if you've had a bad experience, it may be your therapist.
Yes. And that was ding, ding, ding.
But second of all, that not all types of therapy work for everybody in every situation. And that there are different modalities out there and you can try multiples and multiple things can work in conjunction with each other and just aid in your healing process. So when did I'm assuming you kind of had that, like, I'm struggling, I'll go to therapy. Like that was the only option, right?
Yes.
So when did you kind of find new modalities?
So when she said, oh, you should try meditation, you should try yoga, that opened me up to realize like, oh, okay, I know nothing about those things. And so as I started going to yoga, I was experimenting with different types of yoga. And so I like structure. So there was like one yoga where it was like, move your body, just wiggle. And I was like, yeah, nope, this isn't the class for me. We are not just going to wiggle. Like, I don't know what this is, but this isn't it. So like I participated and I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
Yeah.
But there were other modalities of yoga where I was like, okay, it's teaching me to like focus just on me and my own space and not looking at what other people are doing and how their expression of the pose looks like. How does Kim's expression of the pose? So that was really required me to be introspective, which was super vulnerable for my own self.
Yeah.
And I don't always do vulnerability well. So that was a journey. But going to yoga, I was, just listening. The yoga instructor would usually do like read from a motivational passage or like something that she had felt called to write. And so just listening to it gave me a different perspective of the way to see stress or anxiety or comparison or whatever.
Yeah.
But the meditation was helping because it was helping me to just calm down and like be in the moment and be still. And I don't always do those things well either still. But going to yoga, then they started talking about chakras. And I was like, oh, what the heck is a chakra? But I learned like, oh, you have a root chakra and that's like your safety center. And so I was like, okay, you haven't felt safe a lot in your life. So let's do some root chakra work. So that sort of started opening my mind and perspective to being willing to try something besides just talking, because I was recognizing that just talking wasn't working. And so, like I said, when I went to that Mind, Body, Spirit Fest, that was a whole nother like, whoa, this is amazing. So then that opened me up to the holistic world even more, because I literally knew nothing about it. Literally had never heard the word Reiki before.
Yeah.
Like, didn't know what crystals were. I was like, rocks? What? Like, okay, I'll wear rocks on my wrist. Sure. But I noticed that those things were starting to help. I was getting the relief that I was looking for so that I could opened my mind to other ways to heal and get past it.
Yeah.
And recognizing like what was mine to carry and what wasn't mine to carry. So that was like really the gift of that particular therapist, was the fact that she suggested meditation and yoga, because then that propelled me down a path that I literally didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
So, but because I had that experience with therapy, I was like, oh, I'm good on the therapy front.
Sure. Yeah, totally. And it really can be so damaging. And
Yeah.
I've heard it from a lot of people where they try to, they try to help themselves, right? And
Yes.
you're literally paying someone to help you. And the hard thing with therapy is that it takes time, right?
Yes.
So you can't go to one session and realize, unless it's really bad,
Right.
that, like, this isn't going to work, right? Like,
Yeah.
you have to invest.
Yes.
Invest your time and your money
Yes.
into it, right? And so it's hard. It's very discouraging when you get, a little ways down that road and realize that this is not going well for me, right? Like,
Yes.
either my therapist isn't working or this is not the right type of therapy for me.
Yes.
And I do understand why people then choose to abandon it, right? They
Right.
get frustrated. They're already in probably not a great place
Yes.
emotionally. The amount of effort it takes to even get yourself into therapy
Yes.
is a lot.
Yes.
And then, I think it's just a very natural thing to like give up.
Yes.
So,
Well, and I think a lot of people too, like we live in a society of like instant gratification.
Yes.
And so I think people think like, oh, like me, 3 sessions. Good. That's it. It's only going to take 3.
Yeah.
30 years of junk
Yeah.
in 3 sessions. Yeah. Hello.
Exactly. I know. I tell people, I'm like, if you walk out of your first therapy session feeling good about yourself, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Like, you should feel
Tell me how, because I would love that experience.
right. And like, I am very fortunate. I have a therapist that I adore. She got me through my divorce and the fallout afterwards. And I still see her. I had stopped for a while, but I'm seeing her again. And so I do feel very fortunate that did work for me. And,
Yes.
and a big part of that is her. But I still, I just feel exhausted after I
Yes.
leave therapy, right? And I'm like, you should. It's
Yes.
work.
Yes.
You're doing work.
Yes.
It's hard work.
Yes. I mean, vulnerable.
Yes.
Like vulnerable is work.
Yeah, exactly. So again, mind-body connection, we don't necessarily talk about the fact or want to admit to the fact that like when we do that emotional or mental work, it does affect our bodies and
Yes.
how, so
Yeah.
Yeah. But so I'm interested though, because you did not want to do the medication route, which I completely understand, but you were open to the yoga. So
Yes.
what about that was like, yeah, I'll try that.
Well, I think it was just kind of like at this point I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah, okay.
Like if I got nothing to lose
Yeah.
because I feel awful right now and I need something.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the pill. Like it's not going to be the medication.
Yeah.
And I had actually waffled back and forth like, maybe I just do it. She says it's going to be the fix. But then I was like, Kim, you're already a failure. And if you have to take that pill, then that's the epic fail right there, sister. So that ain't happening. Like,
so
no.
interesting. Yeah.
And so I had this like dichotomy going back and forth, like, take it. Don't take it.
Yeah.
Take it. Don't take it. But I was like, I think the thing that stopped me the most was that I was afraid that if I took it, nothing was going to change. And it was all still going to be there on my plate. Like even when the
Yeah.
medication stopped, and I was going to have to face it at some point anyway.
Oh, wow.
So I was just like, let's just do this thing. And
That's extremely insightful to at that
Or insane.
position. No. To be able to look into the future to realize that you have, first of all, you have this stuff that you're going to have to deal with.
yeah.
And you're admitting to it, right? And then that if this doesn't help, I've now done something that I really didn't want to do. And on top of that, I have all of this other stuff that I have to deal with. I think to be in that point where you were so low and
Yeah.
have that realization is super insightful.
Oh, well, thank you. I will take that as the win because I like for a long time was like, you're an idiot, Kim.
No.
Like, you should have just done it. Like, you would have made your life so much easier. But I think that's why I was open to the yoga, because I just felt like I didn't have anything else.
Okay.
So it was like, yeah, there you go. Like, that's it. Yoga. Yeah, there it is. Yoga. Yep. And so, and that was a journey in of itself as well, because, you know, you go to a yoga class and it's not like it's beginners. It's varied ability levels.
Okay.
And so that was also super incredibly awkward and uncomfortable to go for the first time. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like, looking around like, what are we supposed to do before this class starts? Like, oh, you're laying down. It looks like you're asleep. I can do that.
Yeah,
like,
right?
I'll just lay on my back and then I'll like look at you out of the corner of my eye. And when you get up, then I'll get up too. Like, again, had literally no clue what I was doing, but it was just like this desperation of like, this thing has to work because I don't have anything else to rely on at this moment. So like, I just need this to work.
Yeah. Hey, look, out of desperation, right? Sometimes it can be a really good or a really bad thing.
Yes.
So you do this yoga, you do this festival.
Yeah.
Is the festival when you decide to start learning things for like to become a practitioner, or does that come later?
So it was later for sure. So I was there learning. So like that Mind Body Spirit Fest was January of 2016. And then like in February, there was an angel class. And the angel class was just learning about angels. Like I didn't leave there with any ability to like communicate with them.
Sure.
It was just like the types of angels, I guess. And then it was like, oh, that was fun. And so then it was like, oh, Reiki for pets. And I was like, oh, I have a dog. I'll go learn how to do Reiki for pets. And so that was like your level 2 Reiki attunement. And so I was like, oh, it's just use it for Franklin and Winnie, but like not for myself.
Okay.
So I was going to have someone do Reiki for me, but I just liked it.
Yeah.
So then I was just like, and I'm a learner, so I love learning new things. So like I was just texting with a friend this morning about a psychic development class. And I was like, oh, but Wednesdays, my daughter has dance class. Maybe she'll let me zoom into the class. Like, so if there's like something I like, I love to learn across the board, not just for holistic healing stuff, but like I'm just generally a learner. So it was more of like, it was kind of like my self-care time. It was my excuse to leave the house and let my husband deal with things so that I could go out and feel like a normal functioning person.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of like the obsession just developed from there. So then I was like, ooh, crystal grids and crystals. Yes, I would like to learn about those fancy rocks, like Native American medicine wheel. I will learn about that. I don't know how to use it, but I will learn about it. So that was really just, it was like the progression. So then I was doing Reiki treatments on myself and using crystals, but no one knew, because this is like before it became really mainstream in 2016. So I had my crystal bracelet that I would wear. And then if someone said, oh, your bracelet's beautiful, I'd be like, oh, thank you. It's hematite. And they're like, what? And they would look at you like you had 10 heads.
Yeah.
So then I was like, I didn't want that criticism and that judgment for being like the weirdo who does weird stuff. Like, you know, because people think it's like, I think looked at me like, oh, you're a witch. And I like, not that being a witch is a bad thing, but like at that point in time, I just didn't need another thing to feel like I was being criticized or judged for. So I didn't tell anybody that I was using oracle cards to like guide me through the day, or using a pendulum, or doing Reiki, or saging my hat. Like no one knew any of that. Like it was all tucked away up in my closet. So like if my family came over or friends came over, no one knew. And if I would make an offhanded comment like, oh yeah, I just got new crystals, they were like, what?
Okay. Yeah.
Like, we're not like, that's strange. We're not going to talk about that. Like, you can keep your fancy rocks up there. Like, we don't want to know about them. So I felt super self-conscious about that, and about going for Reiki, and, you know, like embracing that avenue. No one knew, because again.
Did you feel self-conscious in a personal way, that like you weren't sure that you believed that this would work? Or was it really just that you didn't know how other people would react, or both?
No, I just didn't know how other people would react, because I knew it was working, because I could feel the difference. And so it wasn't until like 2019 that I was like, okay, I will out myself a little bit. And people still gave me strange looks. But at that point, I was far enough in my journey where I didn't care anymore.
Okay.
Because I saw the benefit of it. I knew how it helped me. And I had seen where I was to where I was now. And that was, so I was like, you could, like, it's real. I know it is. And you don't have to like it and you don't have to understand it, because at the end of the day, like, you're not paying my bills and I'm not paying yours. So I'll be in my lane here and you can be in your lane there and we can drive next to each other.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to come in my lane, that's fine. I won't force you to.
Sure.
So I just got to this place of like acceptance. And then it was, of course, more mainstream. So then it didn't feel quite so vulnerable to be like the only one like with the woo flag flying.
The woo flag. I love it. So it's just really interesting to me, like, how much you embraced so quickly, or seemingly quickly, like going from talk therapy to yoga to like everything is kind of open for you, which is just a really interesting path. Have you always kind of been, I mean, you already said you're a learner, right?
Yes.
So is that kind of where you think that comes in, where it was like you just wanted to soak up everything and see what was out there?
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I'm also not really a rule follower.
Okay.
So if I really embrace my authentic self, I'm really not a rule follower.
Okay.
So I like steadiness, but there is like, so if you're familiar with the DISC, like DISC is like a personality assessment.
Okay. Yes.
It's different from the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, but it's like similar along those lines. So like it's DISC. I'm a very high I. So like I'm the idea person, the energy person, and I'm a very high S. So I like steadiness, but I have no D, the decision-making skills. If I am put, like I can do it, but that's not my strength.
Okay.
And then the C is the compliance. There's very little compliance there too. So like I like things to just go as they need to be, and I will come up with all the ideas and have the energy behind it, but following rules, I'm kind of like, what rules?
Why rules?
Why? So my girls are like, but you tell us to follow the rules. And I'm like, yes, when rules are made to be followed, we will follow them. But if there's wiggle room, then we will not follow them. So I guess maybe it was like a little bit of some of that of like kind of bucking the system. It was not like an FU therapy because that sounds really brash, but it was kind of like that didn't work. And I'm not going to fool around with the things that are not working because time is of the essence. Yeah. Because even though I was like in my early 30s at that point, I had this like feeling of like, I don't want to waste another second feeling like this. Yeah. And like I've already missed out on things with my kids from feeling like a train wreck, but I don't want to get to be in my 60s and have that feeling of like coulda, woulda, shoulda. Yeah. So I think that might have played a role in that too, of like, that didn't work. This is working. So it's working. We're going to roll with it.
Yeah. So when you started and, you kind of said that you were doing it on the down low.
Yeah.
Did it feel lonely or did you have community while you were doing it?
So it did feel pretty lonely because I basically had my mentor, the person who was doing my Reiki sessions for me, but also who was doing my attunements and who was basically teaching me everything. So I basically had her. And then when my younger daughter was starting preschool, I was the room mom for her class and there was like an assistant room mom. She and I became fast friends and she was a yoga teacher and she had shared a little bit about her journey. So she was like one of the first people that I met who was open to the woo. And she's still not quite as woo as I am. But and woo is derogatory. So like I don't mean it that people are like, don't use the word woo, but I say it with loving affection.
Yeah.
Because she was in the yoga space. She knew about crystals. She knew about meditation. So I felt like I had that common ground with her. So that made it a little less isolating. But for the most part, I was like sailing on my own ship into the vast ocean of there was no one floating along with me.
Yeah.
So
did your family know that like you were on this journey? No, not at all. Okay.
Not at all.
Interesting.
Not at all. Because my dad is a very black and white person. And so anything this totally goes against like the norm, that his brain just does not compute. So yeah, I did like,
Yeah,
no.
you didn't feel comfortable.
Nope. And like still now 10 years later, like I'll say a comment, like I'll say something, but it's like it's like the comment goes into the void.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know how to respond or what to say. Like he just has no understanding, awareness about anything woo. So it is what it is. Like no one knew anything about anything. So my mom has started to dip her toe a little bit, and she's been for a Reiki session. I've done Reiki for my mom. She wears a hematite crystal in a necklace. That's about where the buck stops for my mom.
Okay.
So
yeah. Well, hey, I mean, it's good to know what your boundaries are.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you don't have to share every part of yourself with people.
Yes.
And that's on being vulnerable.
Right.
So you get to choose.
Yes.
You know what? I think it's really interesting. So then when you started to share, you said in 2019.
Yeah.
So you said you've been working at this spa since October.
Yes.
So were you working somewhere else before that?
Out of my house.
Out of your house.
Yes.
Okay. So when did you start working out of your house, and how did you kind of promote that?
So, gosh, it was really not until, so I had done mostly, because you can do any energy work virtually.
Okay.
So you don't have to be like sitting here in this room for me to do Reiki for you, or to set up a crystal grid for you and for you to get the benefits from that. You can do a sound bath on Zoom. So I had done some virtual coaching and energy work at my house in Maryland, but then we moved to Pennsylvania in 2021. And at this house, I have like a designated room where it's more functional for people to like actually come for in-person sessions. Mm-hmm. So just honestly on like social media, and like friends knew. And so like then they would refer their friends for sessions. So basically that was like, so I'll say like an organic way is kind of how it developed.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm here at Twisted Shamrock, because a school mom acquaintance saw their post looking for a holistic practitioner, and she tagged me on that post. And so, and that, you know, then we contacted each other and met, and they were like, yes, please come, you know, provide your services in the hippie shack. And so here we are.
So does anyone else at Twisted Shamrock do what you do?
No, I'm the only one.
Okay.
So they do have a gal who will do some things in the evening sometimes. So she'll do tarot reading here once a month. She's going to do a vision board workshop in March. And then coming up this month, she's going to do like a feather smudging class to make a feather wand to smudge to clear your space. So she's the only other practitioner who will do something in the hippie shack, but I'm the only one that does like actual like Reiki, angel healing, sound healing, and tapping and coaching.
Okay. And so when you started learning, what was the first thing you learned?
So Reiki was the first thing I learned.
Reiki was the first thing you learned. So then how did you kind of expand? Because you listed off a lot of things.
Yes.
Right? So how did you expand from that?
So it was really what was working for me.
Okay.
Then I was like, ooh, I love this and this is working. So now I have to be able to do it not only for myself, but for others. So it started off with Reiki, and then I was doing tapping from a book in my closet, and that was working. But I actually didn't do my Reiki or my tapping certification until 2023.
Okay.
So, and same thing with sound healing. So like I had been going for sound healing sessions, and then the opportunity came for me to do my certification in 2023. So then I did that. And so angel healing started probably like 2022. And same thing, like I had been going for angel healing sessions, and I was like, this is beautiful. Like I need to be able to do this. So same thing with coaching. Like I had been a client as a coach, and initially I was like, oh, I'm not going to be a life coach. I'm going to speak about domestic violence on college campuses. And so I need to be able to, if someone comes up to me, I need to be able to give them like a snippet of a takeaway. So that's where I was like, I'll get my coaching certification, but not to be a coach, but to be a speaker and to be able to like give someone a quick snippet if they came up to me at the end of my talk.
Interesting.
And said like, oh, I'm going through that same thing. What do I do?
Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
So where do you get certified?
So That is interesting. So in the holistic world, there isn't really like a governing body that says that regulates. So there are coaching federations that are massively expensive who you can go and do like a year-long certification. I did not go through a big coaching federation. I went through a small coach who was my coach, but she is trained in the Tony Robbins method of coaching. So her teacher was actually trained in the Tony Robbins school of coaching. So like some could say like, oh, her coaching certification isn't real then because she didn't go through a federation. But if I look at the like curriculum of the federation, I like had the same training.
Yeah.
So there's really no governing body. It's not like if you were to be a massage therapist where there's a board that certifies you. Same thing with the sound, like with Reiki, sound healing, EFT tapping. I will say though, in the UK, it's different. So my tapping certification is actually from the UK. There they are more stringent and have like more governing bodies managing holistic healing certifications, so that it's not just like some random Joe Schmo saying like, oh, I can train you to tap.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Do you see that happening here? Like there being a more formal governing body?
There has been whispers of it. I honestly just think it's very hard for them to regulate because there are so many ways that you can, air quotes, get certified because they're not all created equal. Yeah. So there are communities like where you can go and learn SEO strategy and coaching and all of these things. And it's like for $15.99, you can be a Reiki master by watching a video. And it's like, no, that's not really how that works. But most people don't know any better.
Yeah.
And so they're like, now I'm a Reiki master. And there's a little bit of danger in that because you have people who are not the most informed doing energy work, and energy work is a serious thing. So should it be more regulated? 100%.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But your kind of thing is you're not sure how that happens.
Yeah, it would just be very, very hard because like now to be a massage therapist or an esthetician, it's regulated by state.
Right.
So it would have to be a state thing. And then it's like who's going to make the regulations, because a lot of people like on the state level are not versed in energy work.
Yeah.
So it would take a lot of back end work and knowledge development for them to be able to regulate and certify like on a board type way.
Sure. But it's hard, right? Because, and I think we were talking about this before we started recording, but there is just a lot of noise.
Yes.
And a lot of misinformation and bad information.
Yes.
And, I think in a lot of different spaces, right?
Yes.
Like the internet can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be extremely destructive.
Yes.
And irresponsible.
Yes.
Because anybody can say anything. And,
right.
So I guess how do people avoid something that isn't legitimate, I guess?
So I would say trust your gut. So if you go and something about it doesn't feel right, listen to that. Because I will say there have been times in the past, not so much with energy work, but with like, business coaching, where I was like, oh, this feels off.
Yeah.
And I didn't listen. And then 6 months later, when the program was over, I was like, Kim, you should have listened in week 1 because now you saw all 15 red flags.
Oh, dang it.
Darn. So I would just say like really trust yourself.
Yeah.
Look at their testimonials, and testimonials can be hit or miss too, because if they're having testimonials, chances are they're only putting the good ones up. They're not putting the bad. You can ask them questions, and most people don't know what questions to ask, but like, how long have you been practicing? Oh, what got you into this? Oh, where have you taken, like, who helped you learn?
Yeah.
Things like that. And that's also a fine line too, because I was just having this conversation with someone the other day about good teachers versus bad teachers. You know, some private schools, they don't require teachers to hold their state certification. They just say you have to be certificate eligible. And then public schools, you do have to have a state certification. And there are really great teachers who don't have their state certification who could run circles around teachers who do. Yeah. But then there are also teachers who have their state certification who are the worst teachers ever, who should never teach. So it's like really that fine balance. And I think that's the struggle too, is that if it does become really regulated, not everybody can afford to pay the, the fees and all of that, or they're really bad test takers and they're going to bomb. Yeah. And then you have a really great, naturally intuitive healer who now is out of the game. And then you have someone who can pay the fees, they nail the test, and they're not very good at all. So it's a really hard, it's like trying to find the balance. Because the one friend I mentioned who's a yoga friend, she went to a local place for, I guess she was going for a tarot reading and maybe a breathwork session. And the practitioner was in her early 20s. She's in her 40s at this point. So probably life-wise, they didn't really match up. So she felt like she left that session with no insight. And she was like, I don't think she knew what she was doing with the breath work, because she just kept having me do the same thing over and over. And she was like, by the end, I was dizzy and I went, ah! And like, then the girl moved on to something else. So like, but I could have gone to the same practitioner and had a vastly different experience. So I'm not selling it well here, but
I just wanted your opinion for sure.
Yeah. So it's definitely like a fine balance. You have to find someone that you connect with who might be, so maybe that girl in her early 20s does really well with other people in their early 20s because they're in a similar place in life, where my girlfriend needed someone who had more life experience to be able to connect maybe on a deeper level. So I would just say you have to get to know the person first. But if you're there and something feels off, trust that. And maybe you don't go back for another session, or you give the person the benefit of the doubt and say, like, maybe today was just an off day. Let me try one more time. But if you go for that second time and something still feels not quite right, you'll probably want to find someone else.
Yeah. What does it mean to you that this did become mainstream? Because not that long ago, this was like nobody talked about it. And like you said, like you didn't say anything to anybody because it was so, and now it's everywhere.
Yes.
First, why do you think that happened? And second, what does that kind of mean to you and for you?
Yeah. So I think it happened because people see the value in it. But I think it also happened because people see an opportunity to make money. So, when we see something that's trendy and we see people who are making money, then we jump on the bandwagon because we want that too. It's like the same thing, similar, like I mentioned, like the 7-figure YouTube YouTube thing. Like people see a few people becoming YouTube stars and making 6 figures from being a YouTube star, and they want that too. And so then they're like, well, I'm going to do it because I want that. Like, I want the 4-hour work week. And so I think they were seeing the value in it. Like, yes, it worked, kind of like me. Like, it worked, and I need to be able to share this with others. But then they also take it a little too far, and they're like, cha-ching, cash cow.
Yeah.
I'm going to open this, crystal shop or this holistic shop. And it's like, what is your intention behind it? And like, that's a big thing with energy work and holistic healing. It's like, what is your intention? Is your intention pure? Is it in love and light? Are you doing it to truly help people? Or are you doing it more because you see a financial opportunity that you want to take advantage of? Yeah. And so that's the detriment, is that you have people who don't really care to flying, what's about holistic healing and the benefit that it has. They just see the opportunity to certify, like, oh, I can certify you. Yep. $1,000. Oh, I can certify 5 people and make $5,000 a month. That's more than I'm making in my corporate. This is what I'm going to do now. Yeah. So that's the downfall, is that it becomes like an industry that's preyed upon. And then that's where you get into the trouble with people who really don't know what they're doing, who are giving false information, bad information, and then they're sending that out into the world and other people are perpetuating that. Mm-hmm. So the gift is that it's more mainstream. People are more open to it. But the detriment is that now on some level, I'll say it's a bit stigmatized. And then people think that it doesn't work because you have people who don't know what they're doing out there practicing it and not getting people results, or they're over promising and under delivering. Okay. So it's like a double-edged sword a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that anything where it requires creativity to a degree and you're trying to make it work for yourself, right? Like that, because that's the dream for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody wants to be able to make their own schedule and live their life the way that they want. But if you're doing it for the wrong reason, if that's the only reason you're doing it,
yes,
and you don't have any actual passion or drive behind your whatever you're doing besides making money and making your life easier, you are, first of all, in for a lot of disappointment because that's not how that works.
You might get a glimmer of like maybe a 6 month spree where things are working, and then boom, there's the decline.
Exactly. And, I think because I can see that with podcasting, right?
Yes.
Like it's become so saturated, but there's something like, I don't remember the percentage, but there's a large percentage of people that don't get past 3 episodes of their podcast because they think like they see, Joe Rogan and they're like, I'm going to launch a podcast and make $20 million. Right. And it's like,
or call her daddy or whatever.
Call her daddy. Yes. Like, unless you are already and that's another thing that actually annoys me is all the celebrities just like entering the game and having a podcast about whatever. But if I didn't have a podcast that I cared about, that I had like a mission behind, a vision behind, there's no way that I would be doing this. It is so much work.
Yes.
And the payout is next to nothing in comparison. But the wins are mine, right?
Yes.
And so like when they happen, I love them, and I'm so proud of them.
Yes.
But if I was only doing it for the wins, I'd be gone, 70 episodes ago. This would not have, this would not be here. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and also like same with my podcast. Yeah. And it's like, people will say things like, oh, wow, you're so like, you're so lucky you have a podcast. Like,
lucky?
Am I? Yeah. Are you sure? Like, yeah. So like, there's this glamorized thing, but I'll say it's the other thing now, like also with writing a book. Like every celebrity is now writing a book.
Yeah, I know.
And it's like, because you have unlimited funds to publish your book, get your book edited, you get a graphic designer for the cover, yada, yada, yada,
have somebody else write your book.
Right. Ding, ding, ding. So, so I think sometimes people don't really know what they're signing up for.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's hard. You see, especially with influencer culture now, which has become so toxic in a lot of ways just because it's very aspirational. I think it's like spiked consumerism in a terrible way, and that's not to say, listen, it's hard. Life is hard.
Yes.
If you found something that makes you successful, I don't want to take away from that at all, in any way. So, I really don't mean anything by that except that it really has stunted, I think, a lot of expectations.
Yes.
Right? For what life should look like, or where you should be in life, or what you should be doing.
Yes.
And it's just a shame.
Yes.
So.
And and to go full circle, that was like exactly where I was.
Yeah.
Like, and that was the narrative. So like when I left my teaching career, my dad was like, you wasted your college degrees because I have 2 bachelor's and a master's degree. And my mom, like, how long are you going to be able to live on one income? Like, how are you contributing? And so it was like, so I had that too, like playing in the background, like, I just screwed it all up. And with that being said, I was teaching graduate level classes online. And I hated every second of that too. Because the adults were worse than the kids sometimes. And I was teaching teachers. So like teaching teachers like curriculum development and differentiated instruction.
Yikes.
Yeah. So that was also not that fun or glamorous. Although when people say like, they're like, you're a college professor? Wow.
Once again,
yeah,
image
not
in
that
your mind.
glamorous, guys. Not that glamorous. But it was like, and that was like, the struggle was like this expectation of where I should have been in life at 30, whatever years old.
Yeah.
That was like such a mind F, because that it almost pigeonholes you into thinking one way instead of being able to have like a more open perspective of like what life could look like, and not even should, but like that there are different options. You don't have to just pick one path and stick to it.
Yes.
You can find a different path, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just what is right in that moment. And you could go have two paths simultaneously.
Yes.
And that's okay too.
Yes. Yeah, there's so much pressure to pick one thing.
Yeah.
And first of all, I will say, like, our parents' generation it was easier to have one job, stay there for 40 or 50 years and be done, and then you have, your years of retirement.
Yes.
It was a different time.
Yes.
And so I think some of what we need to get better at as just human beings is change.
Yes.
And just that, like, society doesn't stay the same. So, right, like with the advent of technology, things have changed so quickly. And so in such unprecedented ways, which, I've grown to hate that word, but it seemed fitting for that sentence.
It was very fitting.
And so, we have to be okay with the idea that, like, there isn't one right way to do things. Right. But that's hard. That's hard for people to come to terms with. And it's hard because it feels unsafe.
Yes.
Right. It feels like you're just kind of throwing things up in the air and just, not being responsible necessarily with it. But I think there's ways to do it where, you can do things conscientiously and responsibly, but still under the realization that things have changed, things have shifted. So
and that's okay. And also kind of too, you want things to change and shift.
Yes, please.
Because and I think that was also like the problem, because I had this idea in my head that I was going to be teaching until I was in my 90s. Yeah. And that implied there was no change. Yes. No change was going to happen. Things were just going to go on the same trajectory for my entire lifetime. And like now looking back on that, like, my God, how boring would that have been? Like, that would have been soul sucking to just stay on that same trajectory for 90 years.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't sound good to me either. So.
Now that I say it out loud, I'm like, that sounds awful. So it's like, you have to, like, it's okay to change.
Yeah.
It's okay to have thoughts of wanting to change, even if you're not ready to make that change, because it shows that you're a living, breathing human being and you're not a robot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be the status quo. So in that way, I also don't think I'm a rule follower.
Yeah.
But there are other ways where I'm just terrified of getting in trouble. So I am.
Right. Like, I don't want to get in trouble. Like, I'll break the rules where I know, like, I won't end up in jail, like, with no serious life altering consequences.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm just terrified of. Yeah, there's some people pleasing stuff in there that I'm still working through.
That's okay. We all have something. So no worries.
So at the end of each episode, I ask every guest one question, which is, through the lens of your experience, what does compassion mean to you?
So I would say that means understanding, like allowing yourself to understand, like not on a surface level, like tell me about that time when, but like deeply, like looking at the patterns. And with that understanding, also having some flexibility and not being so rigid. And for me, like that says compassion, because if you're willing to have an understanding and be flexible with whatever that understanding brings up for you in that moment, it allows yourself to have that grace and like to be able to catch your breath so that you can say, okay, this feels really bad right now, but I know I'll get to the other side of it. Or like, I'm in a good place right now and I might not always be here, but it's okay if that, if that dip comes, because I'll be able to get back up.
Yeah. I love that.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And I've loved learning from you. So, so Twisted Shamrock in Glen Mills, Pennsylvania. come check it out. I walked in and I said, they reminded me of a tattoo shop. And that was fully a compliment because the vibe is just so fun and funky and cool. So, and it's all different types of things, right?
Yes.
Massage.
Yep.
Skincare,
Yep.
facials.
Yep.
You should probably say what it is.
Okay, sure. So it's Twisted Shamrock Studios and Spa, and we are right on 202, like just past, basically on the Delaware PA line.
Yeah.
And so we have a variety of services that we offer here at Twisted Shamrock. My holistic services, which would be Reiki, angel healing, sound healing, EFT tapping, life coaching. That's all in the beautiful hippie shack. But in the rest of the spa, we do, they do massage, they do facials, we do cryotherapy, not the booth, but we have some different cryotherapy machines available, assisted stretching, and then also restorative fitness.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll link to that in the show notes as well so people can check it out. But thank you again.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, share it on social media, and rate and review it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also support the podcast financially by going to my website, thehxpod.com, linked in the show notes, and clicking on Donate. It takes a lot of time and resources to create this podcast, so every little bit helps. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and love well.